Well, hello, and welcome to Truth Bomb Tuesday. This is going to be almost like a masterclass today because I've got a lot of information that I really want to share with you about how, when we create attachment styles as children, it actually falls into some 6 main archetypical roles that we play within our childhood and within our family structure to keep us safe when perhaps our parents couldn't create that level of safety that we needed back in the day, and how that actually affects your health later on in life when the body eventually says no, and we need to become aware of this so that we can start to recover. So I want to just lovingly remind you that if you find yourself here, or you listen to that snippet of the television series New Amsterdam that I posted on my personal page, if you can relate to any of that, or you know somebody who can and needs to hear this, then please invite them over, share this, and buckle in, get yourself a nice cup of tea or coffee, because I think trauma isn't something that anybody wants to speak about, and I've been doing it for almost 2 decades, just trying to find a way to heal my own unresolved childhood wounds, but also in helping my private clients in my practice. So I know it's painful, but it's really, really necessary if we're ever going to start to change some of this dysfunction and continue the ancestral or intergenerational familial trauma along our lineage. And we're in a really great time of June where we're opening up to more awareness, our psychic capacity, if we're willing and committed to practice and exercise that muscle, is coming online. And this is a wonderful opportunity for you to stop some of these old trauma patterns in your own family. And remember too, that our emotions are really inseparable from our biology. And as I said, and I speak to this all the time, from our earliest childhood experiences, the connections are impossible to escape once you become aware of these trauma patterns. Once they're made visible, it's more painful, I think, to go to sleep or to try and avoid them. And a lot of Western physicians don't follow the evidence. There's a lot of scientific-based evidence that the mind and the body cannot be separated, and we also can't separate from our environment. We're wounded through relationship, and it's only through relationship with ourselves, with our own bodies, and how to create secure attachment and safety, and in our relationships with other people, that we can actually heal this. And science, as I said, is proving that we as children learned in the very early years of life how to fit in, to keep ourselves safe, and oftentimes this becomes a framework for adult mental thought processes. And while I can't cover all of this in today's session, I just want to sort of give you a little bit more understanding of some of these archetypical roles of the wounded child that we actually take on based on our combination of attachment. So whether you're anxious avoidant, anxious ambivalent, or whatever your style is, just know, the good thing is this is about where we self-abandoned, where we rejected parts and pieces of ourselves as children. And the good news is that you can find that internal resourcing again with the support to start your own healing journey. So just know, that the things that caused you pain early on in childhood, it has affected your mental and your physical health, regardless of whether you think you were traumatized or not. We're all bonded through trauma. Just being born is traumatic, but any kind of signs of inflammation, where the body turns on itself, this is where all of a sudden, I'll have clients come to me that have been really healthy for the first 20 or 30 years of their life, and then all of a sudden, they have IBS, or they've developed breast cancer, or they've developed some kind of mystery illness. And this is where we have to go. We have to start to really explore, why our bodies have done this to keep ourselves safe, and to know that that it is an expression of unresolved emotional trauma. patterns like self-suppression or self-repression or hypermortality, or and just an inability to feel safe enough to process emotions, where we become the good girls, or we're bound by duty or this great sense of responsibility, and so as children we take on too much, and eventually 20, 30, 40 years down the line our body says and it shows up in some kind of inflammation or anxiety or depression. And the thing is that we are as children, we're not born like this. These are all coping mechanisms that we developed as a child, as I said, and in the archetypes of some of the wounded child roles that I'm going to discuss in a minute. So just know, as children, we take on certain roles within our family matrix. We become an inauthentic version of ourselves. A lot of time, this is all happening on a very unconscious or subconscious super mind level, based on what we think we need to be and what we need to do, because our parents are maybe too stressed or too needy or not present or dismissive. They're too involved in their own drama to be present enough to meet our needs. So a lot of times, and I speak about this in the Parentified Child YouTube video, which I'll link below this, but you become the caregiver. You become the responsible one, the rescuer, the one that acts in emergency situations, like that snippet that I played off of that TV series, because you had to dim down, you had to be quiet, you had to not express your emotions because your parents couldn't handle you acting out, which actually is a very healthy way to release all this pent-up tension that's pre-verbal in our bodies. That somatic release is what we actually need to calm down our nervous systems and make sense of the craziness of the world. And we all did it in order to protect our relationships with our parents. So we learned to suppress or repress our emotions. And the more adverse childhood experiences you had as a child, science is proving that you are at a greater risk to develop autoimmune diseases or cancer or depression or early onset Alzheimer's or any kind of chronic disease later on in life. And, I think this is where we've misused the word stress. I think stress, the way that a lot of people use it today, is just another way of saying I'm really afraid. The world is not a safe place. And it's not a healthy response to something that is threatening. Well, it is a healthy response when your life is really being threatened. You need the adrenaline, you need those stress hormones to come up so that you can fight back or run away in the short term. But when stress is turned on, when it becomes chronic and it's mostly unpredictable, we call these unpredictable toxic stresses over time, it damages your body and your brain. And that's really where I found myself 17 years ago, lying on the floor of a mental hospital, was, my nervous system, my body just couldn't handle it anymore. And I'm happy to say that I'm here and sharing this work because of my own experiences and my own results, and also the results that I've got for hundreds of clients over the years. So just know, we need to feel in order to heal. I say this all the time. And we also need to start to understand how we attached. So, if your needs, if you were in deep pain as a child because you were told you were too sensitive, you couldn't be angry. My father used to say, I'll give you something to cry about. So if you weren't validated, if your concerns and your fears weren't validated, or you weren't understood as a child, of course it's going to erode trust. Of course it's going to erode you believing in yourself, because your parents, for whatever reason, couldn't be there for you, and they didn't believe and they didn't trust themselves enough to do that. And I think we need a bit of a sense of humor here. It's just like, yes, we were all screwed up by our parents. I certainly believe that I'm screwing up my daughter, but she's going to be okay. We all build our resilience muscles and we find our way through. But what if we could make it a little bit easier? And just to restore that sense of connection, of belonging to ourselves, that sovereignty. And it's good news, that everything that we are today is because we lost a sense of self, because we lost a connection to ourselves. We self-abandoned. The good news is that right now, you can begin to reconnect with yourself, and you can learn how to love yourself. Maybe for the first time in your life. But it does take work, and it's not comfortable. But it is possible when you start to create connection with your physical body again. Then you can rewire your nervous system, and know that you create your own safety. That you have to be compassionate when you're doing this too, though. And I think that's really what vulnerability means, that in order to be vulnerable enough to share your greatest fears and concerns, you need a safe place. So Bruce Lipton says, nothing grows if there's not vulnerability, and we can't be in a defensive mode and a growth mode at the same time. So, we have to take responsibility for our own healing, our own recovery, which means you're just going to bring back the parts, remember the parts that you covered over with all these false senses of identity and roles you played. And we have to do the shadow work, right? We have to go into the dark, shine light on the parts and pieces of us that we've dissociated or fragmented, and bring them back into our bodies now. So after you watch this video, maybe you're ready. Maybe you've had enough of going round and round in circles, and you're tired of self-sabotaging your life, and you're tired of struggling, and you're ready to take that first step in your recovery, to integrate and bring these parts and pieces back from your childhood. So take the ACE test over on my website, Access Your True Nature. And then, if you feel brave enough, let me know in the comments section how high your ACEs were. You'll receive a lovely little ebook on 7 of my top ways that you can start to work with this, work with your nervous system, with compassion, with curiosity, and bring yourself back out of this freeze state. I hear that so often from my clients, is that they feel like they're the walking dead. There's just nothing as fulfilling. They don't know when they're deeply happy, and they certainly don't give themselves any opportunity to explore what play would look like for the sake of play. And I spoke a lot about that on the upcoming summit with Tony Black, which is all about the inner child. So if you haven't subscribed to that, I suggest you do, because it's going to be fun. If you can dare to tolerate a little bit of relief or a little bit of play, please join me there. And I do have an upcoming free masterclass series called From Trauma to Trust: How to Love Yourself and Live in an Abundant State of Being, where I'm going to go into much more depth of these topics of finding, really finding your faulty beliefs. Remember, they're no limiting beliefs. They're just protective beliefs that you put in place to keep yourself safe when there wasn't a safe place for you to explore who you were becoming. So that's coming up really, really soon. And you're going to learn how to really start to bring your nervous system back online at the pace of your body, so that you don't have to re-traumatize yourself. And it's a beautiful place when you can start to process some of these suppressed ways of being in a healthy way. And that it brings me to mind one of my clients, Candace, who was an incredible love warrior. And when she first came to me, she was a single mom. She'd been struggling, for almost 20 years to grow her kids up, after years and years of emotional and physical abuse from her then narcissistic husband. And she, until a few months ago, was still paying off a huge amount of his debt and working herself to the point of exhaustion. And of course, had called in a very narcissistic boss who criticized and put her down at every turn. Even though she'd saved her millions of dollars with her accounting skills, he kept her in this constant state of fear, where she was, being threatened up with dismissal, and the threat of having her license taken away. And her body was just so racked with this constant debilitating pain. this autoimmunity, where her body was literally attacking herself. And of course, Western doctors, what do? They just gave her more stress hormones, more cortisol, more steroids to suppress the stress. But of course, until she could start to work through some of this unresolved childhood trauma, growing up in a home with a narcissistic mother who constantly put her down and gave her the silent treatment, all the while overindulging her other two siblings who could do no wrong. Those old patterns were still playing out in her adult life, and who she was, attracting into her relationships and with her money flows as well. So maybe you can start to see that pattern of how her childhood was literally making her body attack herself, because of all these layers and layers of unresolved trauma. So, the good news is that slowly but surely that inflammation in her body began to calm down as her nervous system came back online, and she started to use some of these tools that I'm sharing with you today, to transform all that trauma into a place of deep trust and an ability to believe in herself. She sent me this wonderful email saying that she's finally done it. And she's going to be leaving very soon to start a new life in the UK with her son. So, even though her family are still doing nothing positive or encouraging to support her decision, she just said to me that, thanks to the work that we've done, she's no longer triggered and she no longer lets them manipulate her life. So she was just really grateful that together we got to push her out of her comfort zone. And even though she beat herself up for saying, that it's taken her longer than she would have liked, she's still doing it. And that's all that matters, is we need to stop looking for the how. The how shows up when you're willing to start to understand how your nervous system is wired. So as I said today, I want to share a little bit of a different avenue of starting to see your attachment styles, and that is through the family dynamic, because this is the great time, as I said, to start doing some of that ancestral and intergenerational trauma, stopping it in its tracks. And one way that you can do that, and you're going to get a very much clearer idea of what your attachment style is through looking at primary archetypes of the wounded child. So think of a family system like a really living, organic, breathing entity of its own. It's a system of, separate, because each of us are different, but they're interdependent parts where everybody is working with everybody else within the family matrix or the family dynamic. And this is not family constellation work, but it's one way that you can start to get support. Or you can look at how I work with this in my mindfulness change process. But if you just think in nature, the goal of a system is to be in homeostasis. So even in a dysfunctional system, there's a balance to the dynamic. Our body, our cells are talking to each other all the time to try and maintain some sense of homeostasis or internal balance. And in our families, we're all playing our role, willingly or unwillingly. So we show up unconsciously in family matrices by repeating what we know. Remember, we don't know what we don't know until we know it. So another way to look at this is that we repeat what we don't repair. So we have to start getting into compassionate inquiry, not only with ourselves, but with our siblings and with our parents if they're still alive, and educate ourselves, because that's always the first step in healing, right? So that you can then put this into momentum and take daily actions and stop these cycles of familiar or ancestral trauma by doing your own work, right? I think the best thing that we can give to any of our family members or our children is to do our own work first and stop playing our part in perpetuating the abuse. And we can't do that if we're not being able to be vulnerable, to literally pour salt in the open wound. Yes, it's painful, but it will pass. And the sooner we get this, the sooner we can start working with it. So, that's the work that I do with Parama Body Talk in finding the amount of epigenetic markers that you may be sitting on, where you are predisposed through your DNA. The epi, it sits on top of the DNA. And any kind of environmental trigger often turns on a predisposition. So if your family has diabetes or breast cancer, it doesn't mean you're going to get it, but this is a great way to start looking at how you've been imprinted, right? How you've been programmed, how the cells are expressing from conception right through to who you are now. So if you want to know how you can work on that with me and switch on or off these predisposed epigenetics, then just give me a PM. But just know, too, in all of this, that yes, we choose our family of origin, because our families are here to grow and evolve us, even though that may be painful. And there does become a time where we get to decide. Remember, the power of choice is always you, whether perhaps we need to start cutting some of those ties. So energetically, and this again is the work that I do with Parama Body Talk, if you cut off a member of your family and physically, so you go no contact, if you're being gaslighted by someone that's very narcissistic, energetically there's still connection, and we need to work on that sort of spiritual level of disentangling you from the energetics of that before you're going to sometimes see change, which is very powerful work in itself. But just know the level of dysfunction with the family system is always going to impact how stringently the roles are imposed and how compelled each member is to act out their assigned roles. So if everybody's coming from a place of needing to protect and defend themselves, this is where we often see very dysfunctional traits in our family. Long time after we've grown up and left home, they're still running out because of the entanglement. So let's just jump into these sort of 6 common family roles. These are my own sort of adaptations of them, but you can look up archetypes. There's a book called, I can't remember who the author is, but called Another Chance, Hope and Health for the Alcoholic Family. It's a great read. And I can tell you, as a traumatologist, someone who helps people to heal from this unresolved trauma wounds and reset their nervous systems, that these roles are extremely valid, no matter what kind of dysfunction is there. I often see them at play consistently in the work that I do with women in my workshops and my courses and in my private practice. So when you can be aware of your specific role that you're playing in your family system, then you have the power of choice to stop fulfilling that role. That's the power, as I say, of taking responsibility and learning about this and understanding it through these kind of Facebook masterclasses, and also to be compassionate here, because remember, these patterns are very unconscious and adaptive. We don't decide as children, that because I'm an avoidant, disorganized attachment style, I'm going to put on this role or that role. It just happens very non-verbally. It happens very organically as a way to self-protect. So most people don't even know that these patterns are running their lives as adults, and often sabotaging, or destroying people's health. And I want you to stop that cycle and start creating healthier relationships with your body, with your family members, with people that you have relationships with, whether those are your own children, your lover, your partners at work. It doesn't matter. How you do anything is how you do everything. So are you ready? I'm going to whiz through these really, really quickly. And at the end of this, I would love, if this resonates with you, to just tell me which role you're playing. And now that you know it, what's one way that you're going to actually take that next step. So the most obvious one, and I think the one that the girl that was playing that role of that emergency doctor in that television series was coming from an alcoholic mother and a father that was never around. She was the one who responded in an emergency. She was the one that cleaned up her mother, and got her in a drunken stupor to her bed, she took that on that role. So she was very good at responding to emergencies. And of course, the profession that she seeks out, her childhood trauma actually served her very, very well. What happened with her is, like a lot of us sensitive empaths, who are very sensitive to the energy of others and play these roles out in childhood, is that we often get misdiagnosed. You know, for me, it was bipolar. For a lot of my other clients, they're OCD or ADHD or functional, on the spectrum of functional autism. And of course, Western medicine treats the symptoms. So, you know, she was put onto a concentration drug. And years later, she's still taking this drug and started to abuse it to keep awake on her double shifts and everything else, until there was an intervention by the people that loved her, which landed her up in a psychiatrist's office, luckily one that actually was exploring her childhood. So that first archetype is very much a little bit of a mix too. So remember too that we can often interchange these archetypical roles depending on what the environment is, who we're with. But for her, she was really that the one that responds to emergencies. So she was the sort of the rescuer, the good girl, the person that you know is really hardworking and overachieving, maybe later on in life, and has this perfectionist tendency, which I certainly know as a recovering perfectionist, and workaholism being my addiction. But part of that sort of function of the role is always to bring respectability to the family through overachieving. So no matter how messed up or dysfunctional the system is, and this was certainly one that played out with my three sisters as well, is, you know, we're all champion swimmers, we're all top of the class, overachievers, never enough, constantly doing. So, you know, that's really that role of the good girl or the rescuer, that no matter how messed up or dysfunctional your system is, everyone can say, oh, you know, you're such a good girl. You know, I used to hear that all the time. And if you're being the good girl all the time, you can never be the rebel, right? Although I did go on in my later teens when I was left behind in Zimbabwe, so the abandonment kicked in. Even though that wasn't what it was, my parents were doing their best to set up a new life for us in another country, but that rebel disruptor, which is the other archetype, came in. So you can see how, when you're kind of hooked into being rewarded for being the good girl or the rescuer, the one that's got it all together, you know, the star in the family, that it doesn't give you much wiggle room to get out of it. You know, you can start to feel really trapped in that, because no matter what you do, you have to keep performing, and you have to keep outperforming yourself, so that you keep being validated by the entire family. So if that role, as I said, is enacted too long and continues into adulthood, that person is going to be a carer, right? They're going to be nurses. They're going to be the ones in the service industry that are just always in the background, but they're the ones that keep it together, just like my client did, running her boss's multi-million-dollar company and getting, you know, constantly criticized and abused. And you end up being overworked, unacknowledged, and just in complete adrenal burnout. But that disease to please just keeps running it. So a lot of resentment comes from that. And then that sort of victimology is the martyr complex, right? Because nothing anybody else can do is ever good enough. You're never good enough. So you're still striving for unrealistic standards of perfectionism. And a lot of times too, we can start out that way, and then maybe when we get into teenagers, or we leave home, or we go out in the world on our own, we become the disruptor, right? So these are all the black sheeps of the families, the misfits, the one that's the rebel that's always acting out in the family. And and also taking on all the blame, right? So diverting attention away from where the emergency or the trauma or the dysfunction is, and putting all the attention on you as a way to try and diffuse these volatile or sometimes really scary situations if there's physical abuse going on. And whether it's their fault or not, the rebels will take it on, right? They'll be the scapegoat, just to deflect attention. And a lot of times this happens when one sibling is really being hammered. For me, that was my older sister. Didn't matter what she did. My father was always criticizing the way she chewed, the way she looked. She just couldn't get anything right. So that too is kind of where I went into a lot of the jokester prankster energies, but I'll go there in a second, because my brain's going a million miles an hour as I can kind of see my own family dynamics playing out. But remember, as I said, you can interchange these roles depending on the situation and the intensity of what's happening and playing out, not just in your family dynamics, but later on in corporate dynamics. You start to see this, and it can be really helpful in getting more productivity and more joy and less, days off because people are hating their jobs when you can start to work with this. So it's interesting to note that the sort of the black sheep, this, the one that diverts the attention, the scapegoat, because they're so used to being outside of the system, sometimes they're the ones that actually end up breaking out of the role. So they tend to be in that least amount of denial about what's going on, and often they'll seek out help once they break out of the system in adulthood, and they make really, really good leaders. Because they can keep their eye on the ball when everybody else is kind of, falling around in trauma, drama, and emergency. So where was I? So what have I done? So the good girl, the disruptor, the rebel. So let's go to the jokester, the trickster, prankster energy, the one that uses humor as a way to deflect tension in the family. They kind of are the family clown. They're the ones that make everybody laugh, to just diffuse the tension that you could probably cut with a knife. Being willing to be the joke of their own reality, but everybody else's reality too. And they're always someone, as I said, they're trying to deflect the stress of the situation by bringing humor into it. So they kind of diffuse everything. They're kind of like, there's a ticking time bomb going on, and they're the one that kind of diffuses the bomb through allowing the rest of the family actually to ridicule and laugh at them and make them wrong. So a lot of the jokester types end up having some kind of addiction issues. Actually, all the types do, but there can be a lot of self-medicating with these roles to just further that cycle of addiction. So you just need to look at some of the funny people in the world, the comedians that, didn't get the support that they needed with this, like Robin Williams, he was in so much pain. There was so much disconnection to his own sovereignty that eventually he took his life. Or you look at people like Anthony Bourdain, who probably is more of the sort of rebel disruptor type, but also who has to act out and defy the norms. So he used to bring that very human element into his documentaries, and also took his life. And then you sort of look at people like Kate Spade, who was that real good girl, the rescuer type, the hard worker, who, even though she had this global empire with her handbags and her beautiful lines of furniture, eventually sort of succumbed to this because she just felt so alone, that she couldn't get out of that cycle of abuse, or that sort of never-ending perfectionism, where she couldn't actually enjoy the success that she's built. And that good girl kind of Mother Teresa, the carer, kind of rolls over into this too, where they become the enabler, right? So they're the ones that's making everybody work for the addict or the codependents. And a lot of time they are really in denial. You know, they're the ones that, oh, I'm fine and everything's fine and there's no problem here and I love my family and, you know, we're just amazing. And they're the kinds that'll sort of say over a dinner where everybody's sort of drinking themselves into a stupor so that they don't have to receive all the judgment that's been putting at them. They're the ones that go, oh, look how lucky we are, you know, we might not have money, but at least we have love, right? So they're in total denial, and they're all the ones that are always kind of smoothing everything over, or they're pushing everything under the rug, just to keep things ticking along. So they might even convince themselves that the addictive behavior isn't the problem, and then they focus obsessively on everybody or everything else. So there's a lot of busyness, there's a lot of deflection, and there's also a lot of what's the word for it, just a lot of enabling, you know. A lot of time that can be the older child, but not always, or it could be, you know, one of the it could be your partner or your spouse. So can you start to see how they're interchangeable, and like the one rolls into the other depending on the dynamic of who's stepping in and out of the family entanglement. It's fascinating. I just find this so fascinating because you can start to see it, as I said, playing out in company dynamics as well, where oftentimes you can see a problem if you're the one that responds well at the emergencies. You can see when the ship is sinking, and you might have a boss or someone ahead of you that's in total denial because he's out of touch with how the whole of the corporate governance is being run, because he's sitting sort of on his throne in the castle and totally detached from what's really, really going on. So the other way that this can go is what I call the sort of the shapeshifter, the chameleons, the ones that they're kind of invisible in the family. They're very quiet. They're the one that's constantly adjusting, and this comes up a lot with the disorganized, anxious, disorganized attachment types, where a lot of times it is the middle child and the shapeshifters can sometimes go from invisibility to being the one that'll deflect with humor, or be the one that is responding, the first responder in an emergency. But a lot of times they're very withdrawn, they're introvert, they're very shy, they're the ones that avoid conflict at all costs, and they don't really like to make waves. So usually the family thinks that that's the child that's okay. But in reality, someone in this role isn't getting their needs met. So there's not a lot of attention put on them, and they're normally the ones that slip through the cracks and end up committing suicide, you know, and everybody's shocked because they look like they're the ones that had it all together at its sort of extreme case. So if you are the one that is sort of playing the invisible child with your family, or was, you might have grown up to, you know, be the one that puts off making decisions or has a really hard time forming intimate relationships. And again, that's a bit of the anxious avoidant, but it's also a bit of anxious disorganized, where it's like you want to be seen, but you don't want to be seen. My youngest sister is a Leo, but she kind of plays into that, from going from look at me to no, don't look at me, because the intensity is too much. So there's this sort of backwards and forwards going on, and these people can spend a lot of time, like I said, they'll be in the second in charge. They're the ones that's actually doing all the work. But they don't want to be in the limelight, and then when they do, its resentment starts to build because they spend all these years hiding. But they don't want to hide. They want to be seen. They want to be acknowledged, like all of us, right? The one thing we have in common is we all want to feel connected. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we also want to be acknowledged and seen as making a difference. So. You know, it's just really interesting how these sort of all merge and blend into each other. But I you know, if you do come from that sort of one that sort of come here, go away, that sort of anxious, disorganized type, or that sort of archetype where you were a shapeshifter. You know, one minute you were, nobody knew it, and the next minute there you were invisible and you wanted to be seen. You came from a chaotic family system, regardless of what role you're playing. You know, we all think our families are the most dysfunctional out there, but can you start to see how when you can identify with one of these roles, that you can see, gosh, you know, you did a really, really good job playing your part to keep some semblance of order in your family. And sometimes too, you know, keep in mind that these roles are often passed down intergenerationally. And when one person steps out, we can step up and play another role. But just like addiction and dysfunction, you can change it. There's no blame here. Just remember that these roles are unconscious. They're blind spots because you can't see it when you're playing the role so beautifully. You're in the performance, but the good news is you can heal from it once you start to understand what's at play. And I know because I did it, and so can you. So you have a choice. You know, just know that it takes some discomfort. You know, this work is not comfortable, but when you can start to be aware of what's going on, when you raise your awareness and you take responsibility by recognizing what's playing out, and also the role that you've been compelled to play in your family of origin unconsciously, you know, and often unknowingly. And now that you're aware of it, you can start to consciously make a different choice to do something different. You don't have to wait for your family's permission. You don't have to even tell them about it. You just decide, you make the decision to stop perpetuating those unhealthy roles. And that first step in transformation is to just be aware that this is what's been going on, and then get really, really excited. So in the comments section, I'd love to know which role you're playing, or what role you did play. If you were a shapeshifter, you know, which was the primary one? Remember, we're moving between all of these dynamics all the time. As I said, depending on what your environment, so that's your relationship with everything outside of yourself, happen to be at any time of your life. And notice where it's showing up. I'd love to know. I read all the comments. So let me know how this was, and if you found this helpful, please share it with your friends and your family. You know, if you're a highly sensitive person or an empath, if you're a pattern disruptor in your family system, and you haven't joined this Facebook group yet, please do. Just click on follow, and you'll be notified when I go live with more of these kind of informative short trainings. And also join me over on my website. Take the ACE test. Take the ACE test. When you do, you'll be subscribed to my list at accessyourtruenature.com, and you'll be the first to know when that new free masterclass series comes out, where I'm going to go much deeper into this, so that you can start really working and changing your relationship with yourself and forming that secure inner bonding. So that you can have abundance and more joy in your life and stop walking around on autopilot. So that's it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And if you shared, thank you for sharing. You know, I think we can go so much further together than apart, but we need to be willing to look at all these patterns if we're ever going to kind of affect greater change. Otherwise, we continue that cycle of hurting people. And I know that I'm certainly on a mission to change that. And I know a lot of you that are here that are part of my tribe. I love you, Cherie, Rishwan, Christine. Thank you for joining me. Let me know if this resonates with you. And if you want to go deeper into support, you know how to get hold of me. Wherever you find yourself, remember the power of choice is yours and yours alone. And if nobody told you today, I see you, I love you, and I honor you on your journey. Your piece matters, and you need to, we need you to be brave and courageous and tell your story with a whole heart, because there are people out there that are waiting for you to share your story and inspire them to know that there is hope, that they can do it too. that you believe in them, because you're believing in yourself. So let me know how that is for you. I'd love to know which archetype or primary role you played in one of the wounded child archetypes. And as always, take good care of yourself, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.